You're listening to the Canned Fruit Podcast with your favorite trio, Danielle, Jess, and Kia. We will have meaningful conversations on what it looks like to have compassion and respect when communicating with others. This show is a safe and brave space to open up. So let's start. Welcome, everybody. This is so exciting. We are entering our first episode of Canned Fruit. Thank you all so much for listening to us. This is going to be amazing. We're going to have so many honest, candid, fruitful conversations. But before we get into all of these amazing conversations, you kind of need to know who we are. And so my name is Danielle Lovell-Jones, and I am so honored to be able to be doing this with two of my most amazing friends, Kia and Jessica.
Hello.
And I'm Danielle. And we are going to just be talking about everything that has affected us in terms of conversations. We want to bring it to the forefront and have a space where the three of us can come together and talk about the difficult conversations we're having, talk to people who are also having difficult conversations, and see if we can come together with some solutions on how each of us can get better at it. This really is step-by-step process. We are not experts, but we are human, and that's really all you need to be in order to have a good conversation. So with that, Jessica, Kia, how you feeling? It's our first episode.
So excited. Doing our little shoulder dance.
Yeah, they have a shoulder dance. I have a smile and sit here dance.
You will come to realize that Kia is the grounding one in the group, and while Jessica and I are like floating into outer space. But I mean, that's kind of the beauty of what we're doing here. So I think before we get into any of the other deep conversations that we'll be having, I think it's really important for us to spend some time to kind of talk a little bit about who we are, how we came together, and why this is important to us. Important enough that we are spending time together to make sure that we record it with each other and to share it with the rest of the world. So I'll start because I always start because I talk a lot, which you'll find just fine. But what I'm realizing is that we are in a space.
We're appreciative of that.
Yes, thanks, Jess. Well, most times it works. Sometimes I talk too much and then I'm not hearing the other person, which we will come to talk about in later episodes. But why now, right? Like, I definitely think that the world is in a really weird place where we've seen some really stark conversations about racial equity. We have had some serious conversations with regard to politics. And Jessica and Kia and I have been like really involved in Enneagram work where we're really learning about each other. And so all of those things coming together, we found ourselves in places where we were having a lot of heavy, deep conversations, but seeing how productive that was. Even if it wasn't necessarily productive with other people, it was productive for our group so that we were in a position to be able to say, how are you handling this? I know I've called Kia many a time randomly on a day where she was doing lots more important things. And I was just like, I'm going to kill this person. Oh, I probably shouldn't say kill. I'm going to really harm this person for like always saying some really negative things on Facebook. Yeah.
And that's why I'm available, because there's nothing more important than talking your friend down from seriously harming somebody.
And that is the thing. It's because you kind of have to have that clear mind, or at least a sounding board. And so that's even stuff that I feel like we really should be taking some time to talk through. Is like what your network is like. Who are you talking to? Is it diverse enough where you can really have some time to ground yourself in those moments? Are you going off the hinge, or is it really something that needs to be pushed further? And so I don't know, just being really transparent with this, it's just been really important to have conversation. And I've always been somebody that said, I can't really be friends with you if I haven't had a hard conversation, right? And I don't think necessarily that's always the case. That's a very extreme version of where I've been, but I don't know. What do you guys feel? Because I feel like I haven't been able to make like really deep friendships. I mean, luckily the three of us haven't had like blowout arguments, but I think there have been points where we've seen different sides and we've been able to bring that. And I think we're all in a healthy place. But historically, as I've grown through conversations, I felt like it was really important that there needs to be some disconnect so that we can figure out how to build, and that's built the relationship. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah. I think for me, it kind of comes down to how you define a difficult conversation, because for me, difficult means vulnerable or intimate. And so I can't name a friend that I would consider a friend and not just an acquaintance that I haven't had those moments with. So I agree with you, but it kind of depends on how you define that term, because it's different for everybody.
Yeah, like when you said intimate, Jessica, it was like trying to be intimate with anybody. No, that's not working. Like one of my friends is always, I have this thing about always looking people in the eye, and like I feel like you can look into my soul when you're looking me in the eye for too long. And it's not like I've seriously harmed anybody or anything like that, but it's just like she's always looking at me like I'm gonna look you dead in your eye because I know that this makes you uncomfortable. We're gonna do this. So it just depends on how you're defining that difficult conversation. Is it difficult because it's important to you? Is it difficult because it's just not something you really want to share? Like what's making that conversation difficult changes how you approach it.
Very true. Yeah, I think there are some things that I would consider difficult conversations that I also wouldn't consider those people that I had those conversations with to be friends. I'll talk about what I would consider to be difficult things with people who I don't feel are intimately connected to me too. So I don't know. I feel both ways, I guess.
I agree, because I'm trying to think like, well, I have like maybe a conversation about something specific to social justice, and I'm like not, that person could barely be an acquaintance. And I guess we'll get into this later, but if not necessarily if you don't believe the same as me, but if we can't be on similar levels in the conversation, then it kind of like, then I don't even want to talk to you anymore.
I get that. I think it's like a shared vulnerability almost, right? That like that the other person is willing to match your intimacy, your vulnerability, not necessarily the topic, but that they're willing to go there. Because I do really have a lot of friends that share my values or morals or whatever you want to call it, views. But what makes them friends is that they're willing to go there with me.
I'm just sitting back listening because first, when you're right, Kyo, when Jessica said intimate, that's not how I viewed difficult conversations. So that's something that I think I'm going to have to sit with, because you're right. And I think that also alters how I viewed the need to have those difficult, why I always phrase it as I have to have a fight, because it was that level of intimacy and that level of, and again, intimacy yields many reactions. But I think it's more of someone was willing to go there when someone was willing to be transparent with me about what they felt. Right. But, so just thinking through it, it feels like there's this intimacy component. Are you willing to go there? And that's how we're kind of looking at intimacy in this ways. Are you really willing to be open about where you are? And I think part of that, you're right, Jessica, it's a two-way street, because in order for somebody to be open or vulnerable, a lot of times it helps that the other person is going to not have judgment. And what we're seeing a lot, and this is, Kia, I think this is something that you wanted to talk about these like online social media conversations, is that it's not really that anyone's being open. We're just kind of like talking at each other. We're not really talking from a place of understanding. And I don't know how you feel about that, Kia, because I know that you in our personal relationship, I know that there have been a lot of places where you have not only been engaging, but educating to an extreme extent on social media, to a point where I was just like, girl, is this your full-time job? This is about to be a situation because they need to pay you for the amount of education and
really?
That you are spewing. So, say more about the social media component and how you're feeling about these conversations, especially, politics aside, whatever side you land on. The past 4 years has been tumultuous in this point. So say more about that social media component.
So I was thinking about that because I know that's something I wanted to talk about, how we're not really having these conversations anymore where your one-liner against my zinger, oh, I got you, or what I absolutely hate. And I know it's clickbait, so I like rarely click on these headings where it's like, somebody demolishes somebody else. Somebody, like, so-and-so. Like, I can't deal with, they demolished them. They have a profound, civilized argument. Like, that's what I want to see or read, but and then usually it's not, it's like so pitiful. And I'm like, is this what you call demolishing? Like, I don't even get this. But I realized, I think what it boils down to is this dehumanization. Like, I'm not close to you, stranger, on social media. I'm not close to you, even my family member on social media. Like, you're just in my friends list, you're following me on IG, whatever it is. And I think that is part of the dehumanization. And so I found this interesting article that I liked, which is
I love
Dehumanizing Always Starts with Language by... it's by Brene Brown, on her blog, and it says that it's adapted from Braving the Wilderness, one of her books. In chapter 4 specifically, people are hard to hate, close up, move in. I was like, oh, this is like perfection. But she says that David Smith, who's the author of a book called Less Than Human, explains that dehumanization is a response to conflicting motives. And so basically we are social creatures, and so we're not attuned to wanting to gravely harm somebody. We don't want to hurt people because they're humans. We don't want to hurt other humans. But if I dehumanize you, if I'm calling you something else, if you are other, if you are not human, then I can say whatever I want to you. I can do whatever I want to you because you're subhuman. Like, I don't have to acknowledge you anymore. And then she talks about Maisie, I think it's the chair, as that the psychological process of demonizing the enemy, making them see less than human and hence not worthy of humane treatment. Danielle was talking about, I'm educating people, and that's really what I'm doing. Like, I'm putting out education, because what I'm not going to do is go back and forth in the comments with you and call each other names. If you want to pretend like the Irish were slaves, then you can pretend like the Irish were slaves. And I'll just tell you that you're wrong and then be done with it, because any further engagement won't solve anything. So I'm one of those people, like, are we going to talk about it? Are we going to schedule some time to discuss it? Because going back I might initially once or twice, but then it's like, oh, you want to do this for the rest of our lives and have more of mine to live. So no.
My question is, where do you think the line is crossed? To me, this really speaks to kind of the definition of communication. And that I think a lot of people, when they're on social media, aren't actually communicating, in that they're not open to a conversation. They're actually broadcasting, right? They're actually just there to tell. They're not there to tell and then receive any feedback. So where do you think it crosses into? Do you think name calling is the difference between that and dehumanization?
I think it's a accumulation of all the points of disconnect. It's that we're not having that conversation face to face. Like, even this chapter name made me like, the people are hard to hate, close up, move in. So it is perfectly fine for you to hate me, except when you're talking to me and you're looking at me and you see that I am also human and I also have feelings and that this is also important to me. But one of the disconnects that we're doing this virtually, the other disconnect is we may not actually know each other that well. If it's you're commenting on some celebrity's post and someone's replying to your comment, and some complete stranger has now judged you based on whatever thing it is that they have decided to judge you on. Well said.
It's more than just one thing.
I want to jump in here and say, first of all, y'all are awesome. And second of all, there's Kia. So there's so many thoughts going through my head. So the first thought is that the long story short is that everything that you've been saying, Kia and Jessica, really resonates with me. Kia is going to be the one that usually has like some really insightful resource that she's developed, and Jessica's always going to give like the critical thought, but I'm going to bring it back to like what's real. And so I saw an episode of Muppet Babies one time, and it was really serious because there was this monster. It's real life, guys. Hashtag real life. And there was this one monster, and like Kermit and Baby Piggy and all of them are just like, oh my gosh, he's so scary. And then he turns around and he's like, well, I've got webbed fingers like you, Kermit, and I've got fur like you, Animal. And you see them all realize that they were all the same. And so I bring that up because I love it when we can start teaching children at an early age what it means to see each other as more alike than different. And I think that's like really, really important. And then the other thing about dehumanization is that, at least less about dehumanization and more about like this social media component. It's the fact that one time this this person I went to law school with was on my wall and thought that it was a place for them to actually like share all of their political views after something I shared on my wall. And I thought that it was really important to lay in a bit to make sure that I was setting boundaries so that this person knew that it was inappropriate to kind of come into my space and not respect the fact that we didn't have a relationship. There was no real space there for him to say, oh, remember we went into we were law school together and all this stuff, but nobody ever takes the time to like build that connection first. He never spoke to me when we were in law school. He never spoke to me when we were, doing anything else on campus. And to think that he took the privilege to kind of come onto my wall and share his opinion when never really having made a personal relationship with me in the past brings me to my other very like real quote, which is from where I'm from, is say it to my face. And that's a little aggressive. People always think that that's like an aggressive tone, but growing up, it was just like, don't say anything if you cannot bring it to my face. And I think that's something, as much as it can be deemed aggressive, is a skill that I learned very early on. Like, don't pretend to be something if you can't meet it with action. And that's something I think people have forgotten, is that if I can't say to you, Jessica, that I don't like X, then I probably shouldn't be using other forums to say that I don't like X. And I just want to throw out one other question to you guys though. What about the fact that some people might not feel comfortable bringing things up? I prefer someone to say it to my face, right? But I might be deemed more, we're not going to use the word aggressive because that's stereotypical.
Assertive.
Thank you. And what have you seen? Like, what have other people done in your spaces that maybe, okay, they didn't feel like they could just say it to your face, but what's another way maybe that people could have just been like, hey, I don't like this, outside of your Facebook wall?
I don't mind if you send me a private message and we have a conversation. I find that the conversations are completely different when you're posting on my wall or replying to comments than if you send me a private message. Now, I thankfully have never been the recipient of any off DMs. Like I hear other people when they, reply to something in a Facebook group or something, all of a sudden there's 100 people in their DMs demonizing them. I've luckily never had that, but it might be because I don't engage. I just lurk. One of the things I won't do is try to in this theme of dehumanization, I will not try to justify my humanness. So I felt like the conversation was going that way and I kind of just dropped it.
I mean, one of the things, go ahead, Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I find myself to also be a lurker, especially on social media. And so I don't really have a good answer for alternatives when it comes to social media. Most of my grievances happen in person. And I think there's a time and place to sort of, I think it's just knowing your audience, whether the moment is made for educating the group or if the moment is made for pulling that person aside and educating the person. And I just prefer in person. I just prefer it. I think Kia has been building the case for people are more likely to react positively in person.
Not even positively, just humanely. Like,
humanely, yes.
If just like what you're saying, Danielle, someone will say something. Oh, well, I heard you said this. Oh, well, so-and-so misunderstood. Like it changes. It's a little flatter. It's not as what they get that way. But if I go to you, I get what I think is the ground truth. If then you go, well, then Kia, she came up to me, got in my face, when all I really wanted to do was to have the conversation. then I, I can't control that part. What is one of my friends said, what other people think about me or like say behind my back is none of my business. I'm not gonna spend my time, my limited life, thinking about what you could possibly be saying about me when I'm not hearing or listening or aware of it.
I mean, and that's another topic we got to cover for another day, is kind of like when to engage and when to not, right? Because that's vital and powerful in its own right, being able to say, this is not worth my time. But, the thing that comes out with this dehumanization concept, which really is what we've all been kind of struggling with, because I feel like we all came into these different conversations with each other, finding our humanity, finding grace with ourselves, figuring out who we are in a time when there was so much dehumanization in the world. And I just wonder, and Jessica, I'm looking at you a bit, because I know that we've been talking a lot about treating each other with respect, because I think that's what ultimately happens. That's what Kia is getting at, is like, you have to create a boundary, you have to create a hierarchy so that you no longer have to respect the other person, so that you can treat them this way. That's the whole point of creating this structure, so that you're actually in a place where you don't have to respect them. But I know you've been talking to us a lot about like respecting each other, and what are the things that are standing in the way of people learning? Like, I don't know if you have, I know you've shared it with us, but I just wonder if you wanted to speak more on that.
Yeah. So I think some of the boundaries, there are so many different boundaries, and I think they're variable depending on your background. Some of the boundaries that I have faced, I grew up in Appalachia, and poverty is very widespread. And so is misunderstanding of that particular population. It's something that I've had to overcome. Kind of the stigma of growing up in Appalachia is a stigma that I've faced. Even still, internalizing that, sometimes feeling like I don't belong in spaces because I'm not educated enough or I'm not rich enough. And the resources that people I grew up with have are extremely limited. So even this social media that you're talking about, Kia, like some people don't even have really access to that where I grew up. So they're still having those conversations with, Fred at the corner store. They're not even really having them on social media, and feeling like those voices who are on social media are so disconnected from you and don't represent you, because you're never the winner when you're from Appalachia. You're never the winner, like not in Republicans' eyes and not in Democrats' eyes. You're always kind of the forgotten little pocket that people make assumptions about who you voted for or what your beliefs are, just kind of lumped together. And even the education of how to communicate. I have friends who now teach in the same community that we grew up in. And how is a child supposed to learn these social skills when during the summertime, when they're out of school, they don't have food, or they didn't have shoes to wear on the first day of school? Like, these are real things that people face. And I think it's such a barrier to the education of communication, to these social, these things that we take for granted, these interactions that we have of like how to understand or how to emotionally regulate ourselves. There are baseline factors like Maslow's hierarchy of needs factors that people have not yet overcome. And then there are some others that are further up the line that are still standing in the way. But to see communities, full-blown communities, struggle with these things, and to see nobody really extending a hand to help them with those basics so that they can learn, and then judging them on how they are, how they do show up in these interactions, is really kind of heartbreaking. And it's something that I've had to overcome as I've grown, as I've aged, I guess, as I've had more experiences outside of those communities.
The thing that resonates with me about what you're saying, Jessica, is the fact, like, so there's one thing that people are taught, that people are the same, like groups of people are the same, right? And they think the same things. So there's that. But what I'm seeing is the need for and this sounds really like hokey, but like connection, right? Because what you're describing are things that I know
Yes.
are real struggles in other parts of the United States, in urban centers, in a way
Yes.
where we see those communities as so starkly different, right? But fundamentally, if they have those same barriers to entry, how are these communities supposed to engage and have these conversations about how to communicate? Who's teaching them how to communicate? And one thing that I've always said, even as we've had these conversations, is that I take this like growing process so seriously, because I know that the people that came before me didn't have the bandwidth for this. They didn't have the time, space, or capacity to think about how they were feeling, how other people were feeling. And so what happens, I think, just a thought, Kia, you're going to have to fact check me, is that there's like root emotions that will come up first. And I think that's where like the anger comes out. So when you think about, maybe it's not intentional dehumanization, but when you have these difficult conversations, there's this anger in place that is kind of masking all of these other layers that we can't see.
What it made me think about when you both were talking was, and I'm not prepared with it, sorry, is this, it was either an article I read or I heard it on like the radio on the news or something. And it was basically about like these two different, the way that parents view their child's safety. So people from like, from lower economic needs, schools that aren't so great, their concern is their child's physical safety, their physical well-being. Are they eating? Are they actually safe in school? Like about them, everything about them physically. And then when you get into higher income brackets and better schools, then you get into them being more concerned about their child's psychological needs. Are they being bullied? Are they not even in the lower, in the lower economic area, they're worried about, can their child get to school? And in the higher economic, they're worried about how their child is doing in school. Do they have the resources they need? All these types of things that if I'm just worried about my child getting to school, getting their clothes, or getting there and then getting fed, because that's for the free and reduced lunch program. It's not just lunch. Some of these children are going there for breakfast. That's all they're eating is breakfast and lunch at school. That's what they have access to. So they can't be worried about, quite honestly, they don't have the capacity to be worried about the child's grades and all these other things when I'm just trying to get my child fed.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. I think this is something that I have experienced personally in my own emotions. I always thought that I wasn't really an angry person. And then it turns out that I react pretty violently to things that I feel are unjust. And then learning that about myself opened up this feeling of, well, if I don't identify as angry, why do other people see me as angry? And it's because I'm masking all of those other feelings with anger, right? And so I just have those kind of, what's that, the emotion wheel? I can't remember who developed it, but there's those core emotions, and then they branch out and you get all of these other more eloquent ways of saying the emotion that you're feeling, more nuanced. And it's taken me a long time to realize what my anger is about, really, what it's actually masking. Is it about fear? Is it about sadness? And so there's even development within our emotions too. It's something that's brand new to me.
I mean, so this is the thing about this conversation, which is so, I get this weird smile on my face after Jessica puts this like really deep presentation up, and I'm like smiling, but it's because it's so powerful of a journey, and I feel, to what we're talking about, Key, you talk about the kids on free and reduced lunch, man, like I get emotional just thinking about the fact of how privileged I am to be thinking about how to have conversations.
Yes.
In that same vein, because you're going to see that I'm not a movie buff, but I'm going to always throw in these quotes. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So we're now in this position of having the luxury to think about these things. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is that the three of us know that we've come from very different backgrounds, but in lots of ways we found similarities. And all of us have found a journey and are still on, again, wanted to be very clear that we are all still on the journey of exploring what it means to have difficult conversations. And hoping that this is what we can do for others who are in our similar state and want to explore with us, or people that haven't really had this space, and maybe listening to our show for a few minutes might give them some purview into what it possibly could mean for them, right? What changes could be made. Because I think about my family, I think about their struggles, and I know for sure that if they could have been given just a little 15 minutes of thinking about this, it might have, just helped them clear out some things that they're still probably dealing with. So, it's just really exciting to think that the three of us in our own little way might be helping other people to think through what it means to have these conversations, why they're important. What I think it's inevitable that we'll start talking about is the fact that we individually have to work on ourselves to be in a position to even have these conversations. The only thing you can control is yourself. So there are so many things happening in the world right now. There's so many topics, so many difficult things that we're hoping to cover. But as you can see, this is kind of like our journey through where we've started, what's been important to us, how we've navigated here. And, it'll just be really interesting to see where all these conversations go. What we are hoping is that we will have a topic every episode. We will dig deep. Kia will do all of the research, and we'll be like super prepped for all of our conversations.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Please, please, please come back for more Canned Fruit. We cannot wait to hear what you all think about this, good, bad, ugly, because guess what? That's what we're here for. We want to learn and grow with you. So with that, until next time, enjoy your candid and fruitful conversations. Bye.
Bye.
That brings us to the end of this Canned Fruit podcast episode. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. We also want to thank our assistant producer, Brianna Jovan from What's Good Productions. If you enjoyed our show, we invite you to connect with us on Instagram at CannedFruitPod and email us at cannedfruitpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your favorite shows. And be sure to come back next time for another discussion as we continue to have candid and fruitful conversations. Until then, this is Jessica, Kia, and Danielle. And don't forget to open up.